So welcome everybody to this EuropaBio webinar sponsored by Catalan, which focuses on the development of orphan biologics and looks at their challenges and opportunities. My name is Dr. Claire Scantlebury and I'm the Director General of EuropaBio, and we're delighted to welcome you into this meeting today. We have three excellent presenters and hopefully some time for Q&A during our 1 hour webinar, and we look forward to this meeting with you. So if I can have my next slide, please. So, as I said, my name is Claire. I'm going to moderate the session this afternoon, and you will see that we have three presentations lined up for you today. One looking at the current development of orphan drugs in Europe, because it's always an incredibly interesting story to tell, and that was with Matthias Schoenemark. Then we move on to a really great look and insight into the clinical trial aspect of orphan drug development successfully to patients, and that is with our sponsor Catalan. And finally, we move over to the business strategies that really drive companies, particularly smaller companies, to be able to develop novel medicines through to market. And that is with Tom Bowles from PTC, one of our EuropaBio members. Next slide, please. I'm going to give you a very small introduction to EuropaBio, in case you don't know who we are. We are the industry association for biotechnology in Europe, and we work across sectors and represent companies of all shapes and sizes. As you can see, we have over 2,600 biotech companies represented through EuropaBio, with the vast majority of them being small companies. And we really have the mission to champion and enable biotechnology and really disruptive upcoming innovations to make their way through to impact, be that in the shape of novel products and processes within healthcare, the most advanced cell and gene therapies that we see coming through the pipeline, right through to sustainability biotechnology and Europe's drive to aim towards a Green Deal. Our members are highly diverse. We go from the smallest startup small companies through to global multinational companies. And of course, we are driven very much by our national associations across Europe, plus centers of excellence and expert service providers across all sectors within biotechnology, as these organizations really reflect the whole voice of biotechnology as it enters into commercial development. And what we do for from EuropaBio is that we help to ensure that the regulatory and legislative framework is there to enable really disruptive technologies to mature and find their way to patients and markets. And this is really important to do because Europe has a lot of really fantastic science, and the challenge comes in allowing it to develop through to its end use so it can be impactful for everybody. And we speak for everybody. As I've already said, we've got really broad membership profile, but we also look at how biotechnology performs economically, how you can help develop both regional, national, and European landscapes for biotechnology, and how this is a core part of Europe's industrial transition to a much more bio-driven economy. And we represent all organizations to a number of institutions as well. So we speak with all European institutions, we speak with regulators, national governments, anybody that help deliver biotechnology through to where it's going are part of our community and our discussion. Next slide, please. And when we look at EuropaBio linked to orphan biologics, it's a really interesting landscape, and you're going to hear a lot about this from our speakers today. When we look at rare diseases, this really is the ultimate challenge for science and therapy. The science, for one, is extremely difficult, and it is really where we see advanced therapies and advanced science starting to unlock diseases for treatment. And of course, when you're talking about rare diseases, it's really a numbers game. You don't have a lot of data, the patients are fragmented and in relatively low numbers across multiple countries, and you can lack a critical mass of skills and facilities to target highly complex therapeutics. And when you add companies into this as really the vehicles for the development of disruptive innovation, it does present the ultimate challenge because you have to bring enough money to tackle a very difficult scientific topic where the outcomes are scattered across many countries and not in huge numbers. And Europe has really excelled in the area for rare diseases because it's had a very strong legislation that's allowed small companies in particular to really grow into spaces where other companies were not operating. And this is all defined by the legislation that we have in Europe. So we have the general pharma legislation and the OMP regulation, and these are all under review now. And so we're looking now as to what the Europe's landscape will be like in the next 15 or 20 years, and the role of companies, particularly smaller companies, in helping to deliver disruptive innovation through to patients. And Europa Bio will be there all the way through this. As you know from our mission, we really want to ensure that innovation can progress through Europe, in Europe and from Europe, so that the patients can be benefited here and enable the innovation flow through the whole industry pathway. Because when we all act together within an ecosystem, it's much more effective. So I will stop giving you the hard sell of how amazing biotechnology is and how it can be applied into rare diseases, and take our next slide. So you as the audience here, please, thank you so much for joining us again. And you should be an active participant. You can ask questions to us in the Q&A box. And if we don't get to them in the webinar today, we will certainly follow up afterwards. Certainly feel free to share comments in the chat box. We're recording this event and we will post it online and try to cover as many questions as possible in the chat underneath the recording as well. And don't forget to also connect with us through LinkedIn and Twitter to share your own priorities and tell your story as part of this webinar. So I will be quiet now and introduce you to our first speaker for the afternoon, who is Matthias Schoenemark. So Matthias, do you want to introduce yourself and share your screen? And we really look forward to your first presentation.
Well, yes, thank you very much. I hope you can see my screen now.
Yes, perfect.
Excellent. Well, yes, it's a pleasure and great honor to be here, and thanks for inviting me to discuss with you the current developments of orphan drugs in Europe. I'm Matthias Schoenemark. We're based here in Hanover in Germany from SKC, which is a company that I founded about 20 years ago. And we see ourselves, consider ourselves as the market access special forces. What does that mean? We are supporting industry to bring innovative products to the bedside, actually through the administrative processes, but specifically in terms of market access to an adequate price for the patients who could actually benefit from the new drugs. And we do this specifically for orphan drugs, ATMPs, or for products that alter the treatment paradigm. So the more tricky part is actually what we do. If we look at Europe, one of the biggest challenges in Europe, although it's a unified political space, it's very, very heterogeneous in terms of looking at orphan drugs, at the value of orphan drugs. We have a centralized market authorization procedure through the EMA, but then the national systems kick in, and then they have different views and different methodologies how they evaluate the benefit of innovations and how they want to reimburse it. So we have systems, as in other countries throughout the world, that look more from a health economical point of view and look at cost effectiveness data. Others that are more concerned with the budget impact that a new drug has, and others start from the clinical benefit and then through a reference price system adjust the reimbursement and negotiate the final prices. So this is very, very heterogeneous, and this leads to some phenomena which are not precisely good for all patients. What you see on the left-hand side, that's a slide from the colleagues at IQVIA, is the median number of days, so the time spent from the EMA approval until the HTA recommendation. And you see countries like Germany and Finland, where we are in a couple of weeks have the product reimbursed in the market and available to patients, while other countries, like for instance Spain or Portugal, take more than a year to make the product available at the bedside and reimbursed. And this is something that for patients clearly is a severe burden. I mean, consider that you have, for instance, a relative, a child with a rare disease, and you know there is a treatment already available in the neighboring country, but not in your country yet. And this leads also to another phenomenon that is here from by 2022. That's the newest data from Statista. The percentage of orphan drugs that are available in the different countries, and we see Germany here with a rate of 95%. 95% of all approved orphan drugs are available in Germany to patients. In the middle field is Sweden, Finland, and Ireland with about 1/3 of all drugs, and here in the end, countries like Bosnia, Lithuania, and Macedonia, with a percentage of less than 5% of all, in principle, available and authorized orphan drugs in the different markets. And this holds true for all different indications, also in the non-orphan area with blood disorders, cancer, cardiovascular, and you see the average here throughout Europe. And then Germany is leading the pack here. And this is important because in the ongoing political process, Germany will play a very, very important role. And this importance will even increase. Why? Because Germany will not lose this position. It's politically not sustainable that Germany says, okay, we go down to the European average. So therefore, Germany will play a very decisive role in shaping the process to come. However, health politics in Europe said, okay, we don't want this heterogeneity to stay. We'd like to harmonize procedures, so bringing more patients to the innovative drugs and specifically to the orphan drugs. Another phenomenon throughout Europe is that we have a Europe-wide reference price system. And this is not a schematic picture. It just shows how the prices from the different countries are actually intertwined. So Germany is a reference price country for 19 other countries, also ex-Europe, for instance, Japan. But Germany itself references its price to 10 other countries. And this leads to this very, very complex layer that adds additional complexity and heterogeneity throughout Europe. So politics said, okay, what can we do to harmonize? And I'm sure that you know that the EU HTA process, so a harmonized and synchronized central European assessment process of new medicinal products is underway and will be effective from January 2025 for oncology products and ATMPs. Most ATMPs, i.e. cell and gene therapies, are therapies for orphan drugs, but also the rare oncology indications, the drugs for these rare oncology indications will be subject to a centralized European-wide health technology assessment procedure. Then the rest of the orphan drugs have to follow in 2028. And then from 2030 onwards, all new medicines will have to go through this procedure. We don't know everything about it. It's still ongoing. It's also moving targets. It's a political process. As I said, there will be some influence from the different countries, but the principles seem to be clear. And that means that on the European level, the elements that will be assessed are dealing with the health problem and the current use of technology, so the current standard of care, so to say, although it's very, very different in the different countries. The technical characteristics need to be described, safety issues, and then obviously the clinical effectiveness. On the national level, and that there will still be a national assessment in each and every country. It's more about the economics, about costs and economic effectiveness, and also ethical issues, organizational aspects, the patient and social aspects in the different systems, and also legal aspects, obviously, because most health law is national law. So the goal to harmonize the process and reduce complexity is entirely clear, is not met, because it adds another layer. So we will have a two-step process in each and every country. And this will be a huge challenge to pharmaceutical manufacturers to bring in their products or into this process, because you will have this two-step approach, one national step in each and every country, and before that, the central step. The other problematic issue is that the timeline that is currently developed looks very, very tight. So there will be a joint clinical assessment. That's the entire process, but you can have a scientific advice meeting before. However, the slots for these advice meetings are very scarce. So I think currently there are only 9 or 10 slots that until the year 2025 are offered Europe-wide, and there is heavy lobbying going on to increase the number of time slots, because otherwise, obviously, most products will enter into this process without an early advice giving some orientation how this process might work. The most problematic issue is that there is a scoping process. Scoping process means that each and every member country responds to the initiation of this process and says, okay, this is from our national perspective what we would like to see in the assessment process according to the individual PICO scheme. PICO is the acronym for population, intervention, the comparator, and the outcomes. And specifically, the comparator differs enormously throughout the European countries. Why? Because the current standard of care against which the new product needs to show its effectiveness are so different. You have countries that have a high standard, as you have seen, Germany with 95% of all approved orphan drugs available and therefore clinical standard, and other countries with maybe 10% or 5%, still specifically in oncology, in the age of the old chemotherapies, the generic cheap chemotherapies, which are effective, but which are not the current standard of care. So each and every country can say, okay, we'd like to have a study or like to have results measured against our standard of care. And this is of the biggest concern of the pharmaceutical industry, because this adds complexity. And also, how can you do that? How can you set up a study and design a study that covers all of these different possible, theoretically possible PICO schemes? So this is a huge challenge. And as you see, the timelines are very, very short. So you need to be pretty agile to do that. Coming out of this procedure, what are the major challenges? Well, there are methodological challenges. That means that you have to adjust, you have to anticipate these different PICO schemes. That means that the extent of the dossier will increase significantly, and you have to think about indirect comparisons in different scenarios. Scenario planning and business wargaming is a discipline that you need to establish. Organizationally, it's a challenge because you have to somehow adjust, harmonize, and align your international subsidiaries, the HTA troops from the different countries, and have to arrange and them in a way so that they work as efficient as possible in an environment which can be very, very volatile. And strategically, it's important that you need to prioritize what is the most important country, what is the most important population, where is the business case anchored, and I think Thomas will come to this point. So this is what's going on, what is keeping people busy, and some of them awake at night. There are some specifics that I will skip due to time. So the recommendations, and also probably the basis for our discussion, would be, what are the recommendations? What should you do? What is new? And first thing is, you need to start early. If you think about a product, bringing a product into the European market, you need to be earlier than you've been. So even before the submission to EMA, you need the scenario planning. Prioritization, as I said, it's important that the system of R&D, clinical strategy, regulatory strategy, HTA, and pricing and reimbursement get intertwined. There should not be different silos that are independent. They need to be aligned also in terms of their goals. This can only be managed in an agile way. So procedures intern need to be agile. Scenario planning is one thing. Stakeholders will play an important role. Patients and providers, i.e. physicians, KOLs, will be very, very important, supporting obviously your work streams. The organization needs some alignment, and you need a very, very strong project management to manage this complexity. This is enough stuff for 2 days of seminars, but it should be an impulse, and I'm very, very happy and open to questions that you might have.
Thanks very much indeed, Matthias. And it shows the really interesting layers of complexity that we see in developing drugs to market, and particularly then when you add in the complexity of it being an orphan drug for a rare disease as well. But we will move on to our next presenter now, who is Wei Lam Ling from Catalan. So welcome very much indeed, Wei Lam. And we're going to look at some of the manufacturing aspects linked to orphan medicinal products as well. So Wei Lam, the screen is yours.
Great, thank you. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Wei Lam Ling. I'm Vice President of Science and Technology at Catalan. My role is to advise innovators on how to move their drug through CMC development, manufacturing, regulatory filing to bring your drugs to patients of our partners. Next slide, please. What I would do today is to give you a very high level of intro on Catalan's biologics, orphan drug designation, and then go into the CMC development strategy that support regulatory pathway. Next slide, please. So in Catalan, our focus is patient first. Patient first is even more critical for rare diseases with unmet medical needs. So our CMC development effort is to utilize our expertise, our breadth of knowledge, the technologies we have in place to support the patient first journey, because every outcome matters. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to touch on Catalan's biologic portfolio that covers the One Bio integrated suite, which includes cell line development all the way through manufacturing, getting supplies into the clinic for your patients. We have GPEX technologies. This is our proprietary, highly stable cell line manufacturing, cell line development efforts. We have capability to develop and manufacturing drug substance and drug product, a drug product fill finish capabilities as well. We have a standalone bioanalytical services that covers preclinical and all the way through post-approval release testing, stability analysis, and staging. Smart technology is our proprietary site-specific conjugation technology that is available, and of course, cell gene therapies. Next slide, please. Let's do a little bit of orphan drugs. Next slide, please. So, yeah. So orphan drugs or rare diseases, rare diseases are defined as those that afflicts less than 5 out of 10,000 patients. And in addition, there's a whole spectrum of orphans diseases, from orphans to rare orphans all the way through hyper orphans. Now there's an increasing, as you see, that there's also an increasing development effort for orphan biologics for orphan indications. Next slide, please. And let's look over the biologic portfolio that potentially covers orphan drugs. So that include protein therapeutics, as well as viral and non-viral based cell gene therapy, both in vivo and ex vivo gene therapy that covers from development, manufacturing, fill finish, all the way to supply chains and delivery to your patients. Next slide, please. All right, so orphan drugs are typically developed for devastating diseases with unmet medical needs. So sponsors or innovators now have to focus on these drugs, how to bring these drugs to patient, not only to manufacture, but also through the regulatory pathway. And you see that list, and you see this particular slide that covers a lot of the agility that Matthias just mentioned to bring the drugs to patient. There is a need for alignment of how the program runs to all the CMC activity. When I say CMC, that covers process development, manufacturing, analytics, and quality control area. So if we look at the very first top line, the program, you have preclinical, followed by phase 1 clinical studies, phase 2, phase 3, your submission into your MAA, BLA, and then post-marketing activity. There are 2 key submissions that we need to focus on. There are many submissions along the way, but 2 key ones that we feel that is most important. The first one is your phase 1 IND to get your drug into the clinic. And the second one is your MAA BLA filing that gets your commercialization. So these are the anchor point from the CMC perspective that we anchor a lot of our activities towards. From the drug product and manufacturing pathway, you see that I have these arrows that drug substance, drug product supply. Shortly after your research material generated, you will be thinking of doing a toxicology study. There will be a phase 1 supplies, and that phase 1 supply is tied into your phase 1 IND filing. Shortly after your phase 1, you'll be developing manufacturing phase 1, phase 2 lots, and then you're moving into manufacturing a phase 2 material, coupled with developing a commercial or late stage process that leads to manufacturing of your phase 3 material, coupled with followed by your PPQ validation batches to demonstrate robustness and consistency of your manufacturing. And of course, you manufacture your commercial material. In the analytical space, to support the release of your clinical supplies and your commercial supplies, analytical method development is critical. So upfront, there is to support your tox and your phase 1 supplies, there is fit for purpose, or sometimes just called fit for use, phase 1 enabling methods. It is needed to release your tox material, release your phase 1 material, so you can go into your clinical phase 1 study. It is also, these methods are used to enable your stability study starts, because that is needed to establish your expiry date for your phase 1 supplies and subsequent supply. Shortly after your phase 1 method development, you start to gain experience and to better characterize your methods and your product. Moving into supporting your phase 3 commercial or late stage development, you'll be putting your supplies for formal stability that you will require for demonstrated as part of your MAA filing. You will have validated method that's specific for your product to support PPQ release and commercial. Developing a method is one thing. You need to release the materials, and that will be the function of quality. And you'll see that you'll have your tox release using your fit for purpose or phase 1 enabling methods. You'll release also using those methods for releasing your phase 1, possibly your phase 3. You'll start to use your validated method for your PPQ runs, releasing that material, of course, your commercial. So this is a integrated, it has to be agile to bring your drugs to patients. Next slide, please. So to bring, as we're looking into bringing drugs to patients even faster, especially for treatment for rare diseases, sponsors are now developing orphan drugs are leveraging the different expedited regulatory pathway, and that has already been established by the EMA, the FDA, and others. One of the shortest route that people have considered, innovators have considered, is the conditional approval. And if you look at the middle column, conditional approval, where this is new medicine with positive benefits and risks to treat serious, threatening diseases, rare diseases, emergencies, and so on. And for that approval, this is a preliminary approval that enable early drugs to get into for MAA approval, and which allows your not your full-fledged, will rely on surrogate endpoint as opposed to your full batch of clinical data sets to get into commercial space. And so because of that, CMC milestones and deliverable needs to also align with that program filing strategy. And what we showed you earlier, and you can see that a compression of a significant portion of those CMC activity. Let me show that with your next slide. And this is similar to the slide before, but all the activity that is boxed potentially will be compressed if we move into a conditional approval expedited pathway. Next slide, please. Now let's go into the CMC activity that's involved in these orphan drugs. A little bit more information. Now this is a little busy. I apologize. This was supposed to be an animated. So let's look at the very top portion with traditional pathway, and you see the big black line in the center that shows you the timeline, a projected timeline of early development in the purple that allows you to get into the IND. The green bar, which shows you the late stage development and characterization of your process to allow you to move into process characterization, the complete process characterization, and move into process validation all the way to your MNA filing. And you'll see that these are the major milestones tied into your filing, ties into your CMC development. In the lower half of the slide, you see the compressed, accelerated, or expedited pathway where the green and the blue bar on top is compressed. And if you look at the little arrows I have on the bottom, you see the tox manufacturing and tox studies have started. And you may want to consider, some innovator may consider applying for an orphan drug designation at this point, because you may have some already early non-clinical data that is very supportive that fits into the orphan application. And that allows you to move into your phase 1 study, early data. Maybe there is sufficient preclinical data and early clinical data that shows definite sufficient efficacy that gives you surrogate endpoints, allows you to consider a filing with your surrogate endpoints through this expedited pathway. And subsequently, you will come back with the confirmatory studies to get your full approval, traditional approval subsequently. But this allows you to bring your drug into commercial a lot earlier and followed by a confirmational study later. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of CMC challenge because of this. So the traditional one is the traditional and how we would do it for an expedited pathway. The development speed is faster. is a challenge for orphan drugs because we need to, as you're moving faster, you're compressing your pathway. So a lot of work that we need to do is really leverage platform process that have been used by the manufacturer because they were historic experience on this, and leveraging that historical knowledge to come back with a control strategy that gives you that robust manufacturing process that is expected of the agency. In traditional pathway versus expedited pathway, there's also fewer batches or smaller batches in the expedited orphan indication. And with fewer batches, there's also less process knowledge, limited process compared to a traditional. So to do that, we need to be very cognizant how we're going to collect our data, how we're going to maximize our knowledge. We want to put a material on stabilities as early as possible, collect as much data as possible. And we also have to leverage a risk-based approach to prioritize what are critical process parameters that can impact the quality attributes, which can ultimately can impact efficacy and stability and safety of the drug for your patients. In orphan drugs, there's fewer patients, so recruitment time can also be lengthened for that. Now, tying into how drug supply works and expiry dating, the stability, staging, and expiry dating of your drug supply, it is important to consider that you have to have a strategy ahead of time to explore, to extend your expiry to accommodate the longer recruitment time, and having the supply chain ready to be able to relabel with your supplies and getting into your patient. This is especially challenging for a lot of the cell therapy, autologous cell therapy material as well. So next slide, please. So the area that CMC focus to support support orphan drug development are some of these kind of scalability. From the biologics side, protein biologics, do we want to consider a scale up or scale out to be able to leverage the knowledge? For CGT in the cell gene therapy, in the gene therapy AAV base, you may want to consider scale up as opposed to scale out, and of course, autologous and allogeneic cell therapy would have a two different strategy for scalability. Starting material, another area, in protein biologic is a little simpler because the starting material is your cell line, a stable cell line that will support the life cycle of your product. In the CGT world, it is a little bit more complex because you have a different starting material, your strain of bacteria for your plasmid, and there's a decision whether you want to go with cGMP versus GMP plasmid strain. That will be a discussion point. The whole cell that's used to generate your viral vectors, the apheresis material, starting material, this is probably the biggest challenge of the differences, variability of the apheresis material from patients, from your donors. What will be your screening and your characterization tools to be able to control those starting material? Reagents. In the biologics world, there's a lot of compendio and non-compendio reagents strategy. In the CGT world, it's a little bit more complex. In the EU, there's raw material guidance documents. The US has also different guidance for reagent and ancillary material documentations that help the sponsor to address these variability. Process development and manufacturing. Protein biologics are much more mature in their fields. So there are platform processing, closed systems, automations and digital capture to support the manufacturing and development. In the CGT world, it's not mature, so a lot of it is different for program specific, drug molecule specific. So that needs to have guidance from manufacturer and developer who have some experience, historical experience, to guide that to make it more efficient. Release testing analytics, as again, protein biologics is a little more mature. There are platform methods that can be utilized for CGT. Each of these programs, each of the molecule will require specialized tailoring of these analytics. QBD, quality by design approach to ensure quality control strategy in place and commercialization readiness. There's a nice guide document from AMAP for protein biologics that's probably 10, 15 years old. There's a recent document on A genes, and then there's a PDA document, technical report 81, that actually has a really nice description of control strategy that helps with the innovators in the CGT world. Regulatory, which is the major milestone from the CMC perspective. There are standard framework supports protein biologics. From CGT space, it follows a similar framework, but there is different forms of drug substances that different section that applies for CGT, whereas in the protein biologic, there is typically one drug substance, one drug product sections. So let's go into the next slide, please. Regardless, CMC teams, despite of this fast speed and the fewer batches, smaller batches and slower recruitment time, this agency expects high quality CMC package, regardless whether you are expedite or traditional pathways. So we need to have, as we move into even early stage, we need to have a line of sight for that in case there is an expedited pathway that the innovator is considering, how do we address that? If we go to the next slide, please. So line of sight to commercial and line of sight to expedited pathway is something that CMC team needs to consider. So we will consider platform control strategy, having a consistent manufacturing process for sterile, for FIH as well for late stage, having that analytical method ready for not just for fit for use, but with a line of sight that it can be applied for commercial. Consolidating development, manufacturing, testing site into a single location or fewer location is really going to help you expedite to speed to clinic and speed to commercialization. Data collection, stability staging, risks. We talked about this risk-based approach for prioritization. As you go from first in human to late stage or compressed, there has to be a comparability of the product quality material that you use in your first early phase and late stage. The scale up and the tech transfer that can happen. We need to having that information, being aware this needs to happen early as possible will really help you to get your speed into clinic and speed into commercial. Staging your material early will help your expiry dating, your shelf life of your drug for your submission. Having that reference standard, making what is your first reference standard? How do you transition your next reference standard, and bridging those reference standards are important for your filing documentation. We talked about raw material qualities, monitoring the in-process material to basically allows you to generate that, develop that control strategy as early as possible to support your expedited pathway. Everything we do is to consider, even when you're doing early early development is the line of sight for commercial. What do you need to do? How do you ensure your validated batches is successful? Having the statistic analysis and demonstrating the equivalency for your early material to your late material, because this is what the agency will be expected. Having the partners that actually have that integrated service that consider development, manufacturing, testing all in one, one stop will help you be able to get that into, that allows you that speed into your clinic strategy. Shelf life and supply chain, we talked about getting that stability study started early. That gives you support your expiry dating strategy, and as you move quickly into the clinic, and the strategy and the potential of the recruitment, maybe there's something to consider as a rolling update of that strategy. How do you relabel your vials or relabel your supply to get into your to your patients? And having that flexible supply chain, how quickly you can relabel something. You need to be really talking to your suppliers on this. And then going, maybe some of these, you have to go into the US or go into the EU, those import license, having being aware that those licenses are not easy to acquire. Sometimes it takes time, so just be aware that your supply is ready, but maybe your license is not in place to get it into to your depot or to your clinic.
William, we have to wrap it up in a moment, if that's okay.
Yes. Okay. Coming in the last slide, please. So I just want to cut one up. Yes. So I just want to summarize. So orphan drugs can be followed from a traditional expedited pathway, and the key is that regardless what pathway you use, the agencies are expecting high quality drugs for your regardless what pathway you find. And for the challenge for orphan drugs is you have smaller population and potentially longer recruitment time. So from the approach to do that is that we need to leverage from CMC. So we need to leverage a platform process to expedite. We need to have a risk-based approach to bring the early stage to late stage in case there's an expedited pathway that you're considering. A systematic approach to look at control strategy, locking in those control strategy will help you get into late stage very quickly. And then a supply chain, having your supply chain in place to bring your drugs into, will reduce the risk getting your drugs into your patients. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing presentation. It was a huge a learning, and I guess the key thing is here is it's to start early and to work with people that know what they're doing. Because I mean, it's quite clear that Catalan has accumulated a significant amount of knowledge over the years that it can then bring back into play, particularly to support those companies that are coming into this area for the first time. They don't know what they don't know most of the time. So it's an astonishing pathway to try and follow. So thank you so much for that. So we will move now to our final presentation, and we can preface this with an excellent question that has been submitted that says, how do you think the revision of the EU pharmaceutical and orphan legislation will impact the development and access to orphan drugs in the EU? That is the question on all of our lips these days, because it's such a huge legislative change coming, and it's going to impact, it's going to shape the European landscape for decades to come. So perfectly poised, this brings us to Tom Bowles, a member of the EuropaBio board and head of PTC Therapeutics, who can take us through this strategy and through this pathway. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you for the introduction. And I have the standard question. Can you see my right screen? So with the presentation.
Yes, it is perfect.
Told me already something. So yeah, thanks very much. As you said, my name is Thomas Bowles. I work for a mid-size global biopharmaceutical company called PTC Therapeutics. We celebrate our 25th anniversary this year. And we are, I think we have some unique characteristic in the sense that we are indeed not a very small company. We're also not a big company, so we're really in the mid-size, maybe a turnover of $1 billion this year, 1,500 people worldwide. But we focus exclusively on developing therapies for rare diseases. So what's what we're talking about today. We have some therapies on the market globally for diseases like Duchenne muscular atrophy. And we also have a number of therapies, of course, in the pipeline for other rare diseases such as ALS, PKU, treating ataxia, etc. So we're really on a pathway to further develop and really make use of all the innovation and technology that exists, including we have a gene therapy approved for an ultra rare disease called AADC deficiency, which is a rare, ultra rare neurological disease. So what I wanted to talk about indeed is a bit like, okay, what biotech and tech innovation in the rare disease space means, and then linking it indeed, as you said, Claire, a little bit to the developments that we see. Again, some other speakers have talked about this as well, in terms of the EU pharmaceutical legislative review, which is the general legislation, but also more specifically that touches upon orphan medicines and rare diseases, is the review of the orphan medicine regulation. And you see that, as you see that on my slide, we celebrate 20 years, which is essentially indeed sort of the time frame we take from development of this orphan medicine regulation. Because very often you speak about what happened before the adoption of that regulation in 2000 and what happened in the rare disease space afterwards. So we really talk about this time frame of 23 years plus. So here I just put a couple of things together. I think again we talked about that the development for rare diseases, therapies, orphan medicines is quite complicated. For a number of factors, as you can see here, the long development time to develop something, even if we do this more efficiently. What the previous speaker said, it's still time consuming. We talk about very small patient populations, which has all kind of ramifications. 5 and 10,000 people, as we define it in Europe, means that these diseases, every one of these rare diseases has a very small patient population, which has all kind of consequences for standard issues such as clinical trials, how many patients you can recruit, but also for access discussions, right? Where are these patients? What should be the price for this kind of medicines, etc. It's all very specific and very often related to this fact that these patients are indeed rare, that these are a small patient population. And there's a high risk of failure, right? So despite all our efforts, and despite the fact that this risk is slightly better, I guess, in the rare disease space, it's still very high. We talk about indeed innovation there in the second buffer, because we over the last 20 years, we see, of course, a lot of things have developed in a very positive sense. First of all, the scientific progress, there's more and more scientific knowledge in the biotech sector that has really created tremendous opportunities for the development of therapies, and therefore tremendous opportunities for patients that suffer from diseases that didn't have any meaningful therapy available. So the scientific progress really comes from the second bullet there as well, from companies, small, large, but also, of course, through increasing collaboration between companies, but also between companies and academic centers where a lot of research and development innovation takes place as well. And very often, or overall, you can see that the third is that this regulation, I think we all see this very positive, has really been a driver in Europe to stimulate these kind of developments through incentives and really putting a spotlight on the needs of the rare disease community. So the overall result is that we have now EMA, and the exact numbers always fluctuates a bit, but we have actually 200 plus therapies approved by EMA. Not all of them are available, as Matthias said earlier, and that's still a big issue. But if you compare that to 20 years ago, when we had less than 8 products approved, that is a tremendous progress. And of course, also from a more biotech aspect, you can see increasingly that these therapies have a sort of biotech connotation, which you also can see from this slide. I'm not a scientist, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you can see there the applications, from gene therapies to cell therapies, immunotherapies. Some of these technologies are really more recent, some of them are a bit older, but as you can see on the right, if you look at the share of biotech applications or biotech therapies, the share of new active substances approved has really gone up. Yeah, you can see from even in the last 4 years, there is now almost more than 60% is now biotech. And again, this is all done through collective efforts from smaller biotech companies, but also larger companies, of course, and this collaboration between the different partners. Maybe just because I'm very conscious of the time, Claire, so we'll go very quickly, maybe even use this as a last slide. So I think overall, the situation in Europe, but also wider, is a sort of a black and white kind of situation. We see a lot of scientific progress. We see new therapies coming through that are really meaningful. If you take, for example, gene therapies, even the word curative is being used. So from that perspective, it looks pretty good. At the same time, as you can see there in my first bullet, when it comes to rare diseases, we quote this figure very often. 95% of all people suffering from a rare disease still don't have a meaningful therapy. So there's still a lot of work to be done. And that is really up to our scientists, but also, of course, our legislators and policymakers that really need to create the right environment in Europe to stimulate this development. The Orphan medicine regulation was adopted 20 years ago. It's being reviewed. It's overall seen as a success. And so therefore, if we're talking about a review, we just hope as an industry that this review will stimulate further incentives to develop new therapies. We can see, as you put it there as well, I mentioned it before, because of all these incentives that we have in place, the number of orphan medicines has gone up, and we really hope, of course, that we will get more orphan medicines approved. We see that the EMA has, the regulator seems to be able to quite well cope with these new technologies that you saw on the previous slide. The system or the situation is quite somewhat different on a national level when we talk about HTA systems and pricing and reimbursement systems that have more difficulties with reviewing and rewarding these kind of new technologies. And of course, in Europe, we have in particular this additional challenge of being very fragmented. So we have a regulatory approval that is quite centrally regulated, but the pricing and reimbursement system, and even the HTA one, despite the HTA regulation, as you heard from Matthias, still will be very fragmented going forward with requirements and approaches that differ from country to country, which is not particularly helpful, of course, for companies, in particular, not small and medium-sized companies that have to deal with all these different requirements. So maybe I'm looking at my watch. I'm sorry to rush this through, but I think we need to finish at 4. My only plea is that as we embark, and we still wait for the proposals to come out from the Commission, both on the general directive, but also the Orphan medicine regulation, the proposals to review it. We really hope that the new proposals will make our systems, first of all, more efficient, that we will maintain, of course, a stable situation and a stable climate in Europe, because, as I said, these developments take a long time and companies need that stability and predictability. But above all, that we really, that the legislation really further incentivizes the development of new orphan medicines, because I think we should never forget that, as I said there in my first bullet, 95%, so a very big proportion of the orphan population, the rare disease population, still don't have a therapy, and they deserve therapy as well. So with that, maybe Claire, I'll hand it back to you, so maybe you can still have some time for questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Tom. And indeed, it's an amazing challenge to cover the complete complexity of the different processes, the different sciences, the different actors that are involved in this. And so from a PTC therapeutics perspective, what would you like to achieve from the from the legislative review that's coming up, Tom?
Yeah, I think you know, without going into the details, you can turn it around and just ask two essential questions, I think. And then if the answers to that is yes, then the regulation review is well done, or will be well done. So one is, whatever comes out of it will, in our case, PTC, but let's call it the biotech, biopharmaceutical industry, will it be viewed within the industry as an incentive to further develop new medicines, do R&D, manufacturing, all of that in Europe? Will it really lead, will it stimulate that Europe remains an attractive place to do all these kind of things in Europe? Because sometimes we talk a little bit sort of abstractly about stimulating innovation, but it really needs to know, the bottom line is, will it lead to more clinical trials, will it more investment by companies, etc., to do that in that sphere, right? If the answer is yes, then the review is good. And the second question, of course, I think it's very important, will it actually lead to better access for patients? And because, as Matthias also very eloquently put out, the access situation for patients across the EU differs hugely in terms of how fast can get patients to everything that they need. And so, will this review improve this situation, yes or no? If it's yes, then the review is good. If it's no, then I think we have not done a good job. But so that will be my answer for this moment.
No, that's great, thank you. And I actually have one more quick question that I think we can take, which somebody has written in to say, thank you very much for the presentations. What is the role of real world data once orphan drugs are available? You know, and in this context, what kind of data and where from should be available? So does anybody want to feed back onto a question of real world data? Matthias?
Yep. Yeah. Actually, it depends. It depends also on the national system. So in the EU HTA procedure, in the centralized procedure, real world data would play a role as long as they are, patient relevant outcome data is used. After launch and after the commercialization, it depends on the national systems. We've seen a procedure in Germany now getting installed that the GBA, which is actually the gatekeeper, could order a registry study and limit the clinical sites where the new drug may be used. So this is a severe impact on the market development, actually, and we might see other countries follow this scheme. So you better, same thing, also what Wai said, start early, think about it. If you anyhow plan to set up a registry, do it properly from the first beginning.
No, I think that's a great answer. And the data holds so much promise, but as ever, since the beginning of the Human Genome Project, it's not how much data you have, but how you can use it and harness it for an outcome. So I think that brings us to the end of our webinar now. So I would really, really like to thank our three speakers for an amazing deep dive. As promised, we will put this webinar online, the recorded version of this, and hopefully share as many reference materials as possible connected to what the speakers were presenting about, because I think it's a really great learning experience. So as we wrap up, I'd say thank you very much to everybody for attending today. Stay connected, because this is a great way to follow up on each of our three speakers and their organizations and the pathway that Europe in particular is following with regard to rare diseases and the orphan medicines that can target them. So I'd like to thank Catalan as well for their support for this webinar, and we really look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you very much indeed.